Hello, and thank you for joining us on the Capitol Report on NTD Television. I'm your host, Steve Lance. Job openings are still at a record high, according to a report from the Department of Labor. By the end of April, the number of job openings was 11.4 million, down from 11.9 in March. The number of people quitting their jobs remained near record highs at roughly 4.5 million throughout April. Nearly all of those who quit do so to take another job, typically for higher pay. The historically high number of unfilled jobs and the number of people quitting has forced employers to pay more in order to attract and retain current employees. President Biden meets with baby formula makers to address the ongoing shortage, but one major supplier is notably left out. Plus, what could have been done better? NTD's Iris Tao brings us more.
There's nothing more stressful than the feeling you can't get what your child needs.
As parents nationwide struggle to find baby formula, President Biden announced that more airlifts are coming from Australia and the UK.
High-quality formula is already on the way to American shelves.
Biden on Wednesday met with major baby formula makers, but Abbott, the company at the center of the shortage, was not invited. Abbott's Michigan plant was shut down in February over safety concerns. While it's reopening, Biden said,
"But it takes time." Abbott accounts for about 40% of the overall infant formula market in the United States.
He added that it's going to take a few more months for things to get back to normal, noting ongoing efforts. However,
this is sort of a last resort kind of a situation.
Anand Iyer, an expert on supply chains, told NTD the current efforts should have been done much earlier.
So my question is, when you shut down supply, you had that much time before you start going short. What happened the last 3-4 months? That's my question.
But Iyer also noted a dilemma faced by the administration.
If they had gone in earlier, they would have been criticized for interfering. When they go in late, then, it's more expensive.
And earlier this week, the administration invoked the Defense Production Act for a third time to help ease the shortage. It also has been importing a limited supply of formula from overseas. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Iris Tao, NTD News.
Here to assess the situation, our next guest is Chief Economist at the Texas Public Policy Institute, Vance Ginn. Vance Ginn, thank you so much for joining us on the Capitol Report.
Thank you.
Vance, Secretary of Treasury Janet Yellen has just walked back some of her previous statements that inflation would be manageable and that it posed a small risk. Is there accountability, or should there be, for such people who hold such significant positions and control the direction of the country to a certain degree?
Well, we saw this coming. Whenever you put that much money into the economy, running massive deficits, $6 trillion over the course of the last 2 years, but an increase of about 25% of the national debt to $30 trillion. And then you have the Federal Reserve printing much of that money, monetizing the debt. What you're going to have is inflation. The result is going to be inflation. So we've been saying, many of us have been saying this for a long time, that it's not transitory inflation. It's not going to be a short term. It's more persistent inflation, just given how much money has been pumped into the economy. And so the White House likes to blame everywhere else. Even if you look at the Federal Reserve, they thought this was going to be transitory inflation. They all got it wrong. And so a lot of them are coming out now saying, well, we got this wrong, but there aren't really any repercussions. What I hope maybe the repercussions will be that the American people will see that what they're doing is making the economic situation worse. That's what the Treasury and the Fed are doing. And we need to change those policies of big government and get back to a more free market approach.
Vance, had Secretary Yellen anticipated the inflation that we're experiencing now in the correct way, could she have taken measures or given different advice to avoid this skyrocketing inflation?
Well, I think a big part of that would have been not passing the American Rescue Plan Act last year, ARPA, right around $2 trillion that's being pumped into the economy, increase the national debt by about that much, and then you get it monetized by the Federal Reserve, which is going to lead to more inflation. If there's too much money chasing too few goods, and they've been regulating the heck out of the supply side of the economy, you're going to see massive inflation. And it's been 8.3% as measured by the headline CPI, and in some measures, have it even higher than that. And so I really think they need to do a better job of understanding how economic policy influences the economy and people's lives. This is influencing everyone around us, right? Even if your wages have went up, let's say by 8%, you still have a real reduction. Your purchasing power is going down because inflation is going up at 8.3%. This is a disaster. Many people are having to go into their savings accounts, and it's just one thing after another where the Biden administration says one thing, but they're really doing something else. And so I hope that they can get away from these policies of getting away from fossil fuels. We need more production. If you think about oil and gas prices being so high, we need to be reducing the deficit, not focused on increasing government spending and raising taxes, but really allowing for a lot of this government spending to just start to stop and slow down so we can have balanced budgets again. Imagine that. We haven't seen that in so long. And there are just so many things that should be on the table.
Vance, we hear all kinds of viewpoints as to why we're here and why it was not able to be foresaw on her side. Is it fair to shift some of the blame on external factors such as supply chain, or do you think there was enough or is enough to do policy-wise to subdue this economic cancer?
Well, I think that the supply side issue has been a concern, and especially early on, when COVID and when things were opening back up, that did reduce some of the supply chains, the action that was going on there. But that would just have increased prices in those particular markets. Inflation is when you have the general level of prices going up all around you, which is driven by increases in the money supply being greater than supply and supply that's out there. And so by looking at only the supply constraints, that's just one piece of the puzzle to the overall puzzle that we should be looking at. And so they're missing everything, all of the major factors that are going into the economy. I mean, the amount of government spending that's been put out there, the checks that were handed out, the unemployment benefits that were an extra plus up overall, all these things were driving up the amount of inflationary pressure because the Fed just monetized that increase in the national debt. And so really what I think they should be doing is rolling back a lot of the regulations, finding ways to increase oil and gas production, finding ways to cut taxes where you can, and really start to reducing government spending in areas that they shouldn't be spending money on. And by doing so, we can have a more vibrant economy, more people going back to work, and then allowing for this inflationary pressure to start going back down, because 8.3% is way too high. I think we're in a period really of stagflation. I mean, the first quarter GDP was down 1.5%, a contraction in the first quarter, and now we're having continued slow growth here in the second quarter, along with high inflation. That's the definition of inflation. I mean, stagflation.
Vance Ginn, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Texas continues to mourn the 21 lives that were lost in the Uvalde school shooting. In a search for solutions, Texas Governor Greg Abbott is asking the legislature to look at possible new laws to prevent such a tragedy in the future. And with renewed calls to restrict gun rights, how are lawmakers on Capitol Hill responding to mounting political pressure? NTD's Melina Wisecup has more.
Students and staff will not return to Uvalde's Robb Elementary School following the deadly shooting last week. And now Texas's Governor Greg Abbott is calling on the state's legislature to look at solutions to prevent future tragedies. Solutions including school safety, mental health, social media, police training, and firearm safety. Since the shooting, U.S. Senator Ted Cruz from Texas has repeatedly been criticized by some for his gun rights advocacy. But he says the federal solution is to give schools more money for security.
Senate Democrats cynically blocked school safety funding had Uvalde gotten a grant to upgrade the school security. They might have made changes that could have stopped this shooter.
Public sentiment is high following the shooting, and gun control activists are protesting across the country.
We banned assault weapons, and that ban spread to the statewide assault weapons ban, and that ban was taken up by Washington as well.
And how far does the White House want to go with gun restrictions?
He supports a ban on sale of assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. He does not support a ban on the sale of all handguns.
Universal background checks have also been pushed by some activists. Here's one congressman from Texas explaining why he's opposed to this idea.
If my neighbor, let's say her husband is gone for the week and she wants to borrow my gun, that would make us both felons. That's the problem with universal background checks. And the people who are least likely to adhere to a universal background check are the criminals who intend harm.
The Democrat-controlled House, acting quickly at a time when public sentiment is high, will move tomorrow to mark up a bill dubbed the Protecting Our Kids Act. It would make it a federal law to raise the minimum age to 21 for buying some semi-automatic firearms, among other restrictions. The action the House is taking this week is mainly a messaging tool for House Democrats to communicate with the American people that they're doing something on gun control. Now, I refer to this as a messaging tool because the specific proposals that we've seen put forth by the House so far are unlikely to garner the 10 Republican votes needed in the Senate to get them to Biden's desk. With that being said, though, there is a bipartisan group of senators right now working on some form of legislation to address that shooting that we saw in Texas. They're looking at very watered down proposals like encouraging states to adopt red flag laws and other more moderate proposals. Now, the question begs, since most Republicans in the past have neglected to vote for gun restrictions, it brings up the question of how much political pressure they're facing and if they're willing to cross the aisle and vote for gun legislation. There are 5 Republicans in those negotiation talks right now, so those 5 Republicans would only need to convince another 5 Republicans to vote for some form of gun reform legislation in order to get it to Biden's desk. Steve, back to you.
Thank you for watching the Capitol Report. If you want to see our full broadcast, check us out at epochtv.com.